Welcome into the PFF NFL Daily. Today discussing Sam's edge defender rankings all over at pff.com. You got a top 10, we got a little mid-round favorite prospect and a sleeper there. So, Sam, I'll let you start. You've been going through some of your position rankings leading up to the draft. How do you have the top of the edge defender class shaken out?
Yeah, I mean, if you've listened to this podcast it wouldn't be a surprise to know that number one is Aiden Hutchinson. I think he's just the cleanest of these prospects. He has the best composite of skill set, of production, of athleticism, all of that stuff put together, character, work ethic, blah, blah, blah. Everything. He's got either the best or, second best in the entire class. So I just can't see a good argument to put anybody else above Aiden Hutchinson. Yes, Trayvon Walker may have him marginally in athleticism and overall measurables, but that's about it, right? Like Aiden Hutchinson, I think, has got to be clearly the number one.
Yeah, I'm with you on Hutchinson, right? I mean, as we go through this class, I think one of the things we always have to debate here is how much does production matter? Remember at PFF, when production for us is how well did you perform on thousands of snaps, not just in sack totals, not just in tackles. It is a huge component when projecting edge defenders. And then you add in the other stuff, the athleticism, the arm length, and all that stuff. I think Aiden Hutchinson, absolutely the cleanest prospect. Then we start to get into, for you, Kayvon Thibodeau, number 2 out of Oregon, George Karlaftis out of Purdue, number 3, Jermaine Johnson, number 4 out of Florida State. I think once you get into Jermaine Johnson, he's the first guy, much like Trayvon Walker at number 5 in Georgia, where the production doesn't match a lot of the hype, where both of those guys have been mocked, potentially in the top 10. So how did you sort those next few out?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually think there's quite a gap between Hutchinson and the rest. Like Hutchinson does have incredible production. He does have the athleticism. He does have the size. He's got, again, the cleanest tape of all these guys. Okay, there are some nits to pick, 32-inch arms for a guy that's 6'7". Aside from anything else, that's just weird. So there's some things you can point at, but they're much smaller than anybody else. Thibodeau, I think, is quite a way behind Hutchinson, but I think he's the best of the rest. He does have great production. He's got incredible burst off the line. I think he's got really good speed to power as well, which you don't hear talked about his game a lot for a guy who is a bit sort of skinnier and doesn't necessarily look as big and dominant as some of these other athletes. But he actually shows a lot of that on tape, converting that speed into a power rush and getting home anyway. I can see why there are people that are a little bit concerned about his bend and ability to turn the corner. And you see some of that in his 3-cone time, which isn't as good as guys like Hutchinson or Trayvon Walker. But ultimately, I think that Thibodeau does have the best kind of pass rushing tape of any of these remaining guys.
Yeah, you mentioned speed to power, and I think, look, I talk a lot about the production with edge rushers, but how they do it does absolutely matter. When you watch them win in college, you want to see players with translatable skills, and that is one of those, because some of the guys that are lower on the list might only have the speed, they might only have the burst, but they don't have the power. And we know how good NFL offensive tackles are. If you don't have counters, inside counter, power, whatever it is, that is huge to translate pass rushing production to the next level.
Yeah, and it's also big if your weakness is going to be that you don't necessarily have the best ability to turn the corner and bend and run that arc. If you're able to convert that speed, get off the line quickly with those first steps and then convert it into power, it's a way to offset that specific weakness. If you're able to do that well and convert those speed rushes into a power rush or an inside counter, that is going to, offset or negate the fact that you might not necessarily be able to run the arc as well as it suggests that your speed and 40 time should let you do.
Karlaftis and Jermaine Johnson, right? Purdue for Karlaftis, Florida State for Jermaine Johnson. Both power players in my mind. I mean, guys that you see them jacking up tight ends in the run game, jacking up offensive tackles as far as from a pass rushing standpoint. Karlaftis, though, better production, right? Almost 24% pass rush win rate. That's one of the better numbers that we've seen just in recent years among prospects. Jermaine Johnson, one of those guys that had only 46 pressures last year, but 14 of those were sacks. Those are some of those like buyer beware type of guys. If too many of the pressures are sacks, it kind of inflates, the perception about that type of player. But Jermaine Johnson was so good at the Senior Bowl. I think that, for me at least, eases some of my concerns about his lack of production through his career translating to the next level.
I kind of love Karlaftis. He reminds me a lot. Mike Renner used this comp, I think, but he reminds me a lot of Brandon Graham. And I think he's similarly underrated. Like, even though Brandon Graham was a first-round pick, that dude went like half a decade before anybody recognized that he was actually a really elite pass rusher because he never got a ton of sacks. He got pressure, and oftentimes he was getting pressure in a limited role, and he was being moved between stand-up linebacker and 4-3 defensive end, hand the ground. And for some reason, the first round draft pick thing didn't really carry with him the way it did with does with other guys, and kind of always gives them that boost of reputation. I think Karlaftis feels similar. I know he's being talked about as a surefire first round pick, but he's the guy that's being ignored. While we focus on Hutchinson and Thibodeau and Trayvon Walker and Jermaine Johnson, Karlaftis is the guy just sort of sitting there while everybody looks elsewhere, and yet he is really productive. He plays with that high motor. He's got a kind of great low pad level, leverage guy. Sort of, again, a lot like Brandon Graham. I feel like he'll be a good player. Like, how much better than that, I think, is up for debate, but it feels like he will just be good almost immediately.
Right now is a great time to get even more information on all these prospects. You get 50% off a PFF Elite annual subscription if you use the code DRAFT50. We get 365 days of Elite. That's what you get when you sign up. All of PFF's locked article content, the PFF NFL Draft Guide, completely unlocked mock draft simulator, data and grades for the entire 2021 and upcoming 2022 season. It's promo code DRAFT50 for 50% off a PFF Elite annual subscription. And we mentioned Aiden Hutchinson earlier. Don't forget, PFF has launched Hutch, a 4-part podcast series with number 1 overall NFL draft prospect Aiden Hutchinson. Came out April 13th. Be sure to check it out. The show includes interviews with Jim Harbaugh, current and former Michigan football players, key members of Aiden's family, media members, and draft analysts. Check out Hutch on YouTube and wherever you're listening to this podcast. Okay, so Trayvon Walker from Georgia. We've talked about him quite a bit on both of our podcasts here, Sam. The freak athlete who just doesn't have the production to back it up. Want to reiterate, doesn't mean he can't do it at the next level. It just means there's as much risk with projecting him to do it as there is maybe someone who is a bad athlete, right? And the same way you put a risk label on a prospect, you put it on a guy like Walker who just you haven't seen win those one-on-ones as a pass rusher.
Yeah, he is a total projection at this point. There's no evidence that he rushes the passer at a particularly high level. And some of that is because he doesn't get given the opportunities to do it, or the volume of opportunities to do it that these other guys do. And if you look at, if you look at a sack reel, for example, right, most of those plays are not plays like everybody else where he's put on the edge, allowed to attack upfield and just pin his ears back. There are plays where he's had to play the run first or, stack up a guy and then converted that to rush the passer once he's seen what's happening on the play. So it's not that it's necessarily his fault that he hasn't got this pressure, but the fact remains that he hasn't, and it isn't there yet. So you have to basically look at him and say, he is a supreme level athlete. Therefore, we assume there's no reason he can't be an elite pass rusher at the NFL. But that's a hell of an assumption to be making about a guy anywhere in the top of the first round. And for that, I just can't see certainly how you can put him above Hutchinson, above Thibodeau. I don't really see how you can put him above Karlaftis, given how much of a projection that is. Maybe I can see an argument over Jermaine Johnson, but that should be the range he's in, given what we know about him.
I'll read out your 6 through 10 here. Boye Mafe from Minnesota, number 6. Nick Benito, number 7 from Oklahoma. Number 8, Drake Jackson out of USC. Number 9, David Ojabo from Michigan, who does have the ACL injury or Achilles injury, and would have been probably in that top 5 or 6 range and in the first round. And then Arnold Ebiketie from Penn State, formerly of Temple, technically sound, consistent producer at the NFL level. Anybody from 6 through 10 that you want to highlight in your rankings here?
Well, I love that little run of 6, 7, 8. Boye Mafe from Minnesota, Nick Benito from Oklahoma, and Drake Jackson from USC, because those are the speed, burst, bend type edge rushers. Those guys all bring speed, burst, and just that ridiculous pass rush ability. Everybody, when they're looking at pass rushers, they want to see that one pure play of Von Miller-esque, bend around the corner, that that textbook play. Drake Jackson, like that's what he excels at. Now, it's I don't want to say it's all he excels at, but like that is his one trick, and it's a great one trick to have. So those guys, it's all sort of various shades of like, well, how good can they be against the run? How good can they be in a very, other ways? But that is the thing that they've got. They've got speed, they've got edge rush ability, and just are so kind of quick and fluid as athletes. I love all three of those guys. It's just a case of seeing how good they can get at the next level.
Benito's the guy for me. One of those guys that maybe doesn't win with power, but does have that speed. And look, once we get into that range, all those guys have their warts, but could be really good value in the second round, especially as teams need 3 to 4 legitimate pass rushers. And I think all of those guys can absolutely contribute. So get to pff.com. You can check out the entire top 10. And it's Sam's edge defender rankings. He's going position by position over on the